Once upon a time, there was a lovely woman named Esther, and she became queen alongside of King Xerxes in Persia. But the story of Esther doesn't begin with her becoming queen. It begins a lot soon, much earlier than that. The book of Esther begins like this. In Esther 1 through 9, says this is the story of something that happened in the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled from India to Ethiopia, provinces in all. King Xerxes ruled from the royal throne in the palace complex of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his officials and ministers. The military brass of Persia and Media were also there, along with the princes and governors of all the provinces. For 6 months he put on exhibit the huge wealth of his empire and his stunningly beautiful royal splendors. At the conclusion of the exhibit, the king threw a week-long party for everyone living in Susa, the capital, important and unimportant alike. The party was in the garden courtyard of the king's summer house. The courtyard was elaborately decorated with white and blue cotton curtains tied with linen and purple cords to silver rings on marble columns. Silver and gold couches were arranged in a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in gold chalices, each one of its kind. The royal wine flowed freely, a generous king. The guests could drink as much as they liked, king's orders, with waiters at their elbows to refill the drinks. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti was throwing a separate party for women inside King Xerxes' royal palace. During the 7th day of the feast, the king sent for his wife, the queen, to come and show her off. He wanted to show her off to the people that he cared about, but she refused. She didn't want to come. She wanted to stay with her banquet. So to make an example of her to not disobey for wives not to disobey their husbands, he banished her from the kingdom. So King Xerxes began to look for a new queen, and in chapter 2 we're introduced to the character of Mordecai. Mordecai was from the tribe of Benjamin, and his family was exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. He was the older cousin of the beautiful Esther, whose name was actually Hadassah. And Mordecai adopted Esther after her parents died when she was young. And so during the time when King Xerxes was looking for the king, Esther was brought into the kingdom as one of the applicants. But one of the king's eunuchs found her very lovely and liked the way that she was, because she was a nice woman, and so he gave her advice on whenever she was to approach the king, along with Mordecai's advice. So before she went to see the king, she went through 12 months of a makeover of sorts, where she got like training and different things, and she just became beautiful. And so Esther finally had her chance to meet the king. And in Esther 2:16 through 18, it says, she was taken to King Xerxes in a royal palace in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, and the 7th year of the king's reign. The king fell in love with Esther far more than any of his other women or any of the other virgins. He was totally smitten by her. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then his king gave a great banquet for all the nobles and officials, Esther's banquet. He proclaimed a holiday for all the provinces and handed out gifts and royal generosities. And through this whole process, Esther kept her identity as a Jew a secret because Mordecai had suggested that she did that. A while later, Mordecai was working at the front gates of the kingdom, and he overheard 2 of the king's eunuchs saying that they were going to kill King Xerxes. So Mordecai told Esther what the plan was, and in turn it saved the king's life. Xerxes later promoted Haman which was one of his officials. He appointed him to officials, the highest ranking official in all the government. And he also decided that anyone could bow down to Haman, and that was the king's command. And Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, and because he was not going to serve him. Haman was outraged because of the situation. He did not like it, and he also found out that Mordecai was a Jew. So Haman decided that he was not only going to take out Haman, but he was going to take out the entire Jew population in the area. Haman came up with a plan that would take out all of the people, and he decided, and he told the king, and the king saw that it was okay. Later on, Mordecai needed Esther's help, and because Mordecai learned that Haman had placed this order and that the king saw it fit. In Esther 4:1-3, it says, "When Mordecai learned what had been done, he ripped his clothes in shreds and put on sackcloth and ashes. Then he went out into the streets of the city, crying out in a loud and bitter cry. He came only as far as the king's gates, for no one dressed in sackcloth was allowed to enter the king's gates. As the king's order was posted in every province, there was loud lament among the Jews, fasting, weeping, and wailing, and most of them stretched out in sackcloth and ashes." Now this is the part of the story where a lot of people know of Esther, because Esther and Mordecai had this conversation that Mordecai wanted her to approach the king, but Esther was afraid to, because she was afraid that she was going to be killed for approaching the king without being summoned. And this is the verse that many people know of, and it's Esther 4:12-14. It says, "When the eunuch told Mordecai that Esther had said, Mordecai sent her this message: 'Don't think that just because you live in the king's house, you're one of the Jews who will get out of this alive. If you persist in staying silent at the time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else. But you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows, maybe you were made queen for just such a time as this.'" So Esther decided that she was going to follow through, and she told her cousin to gather all of the Jews in the area and fast and pray for 3 days, and that she would do the same with her maids. And so on the 3rd day, she approached the king, and she was afraid. She had fears that she was going to die, but she approached him anyways. And when she approached the king, instead of the king wanting her to leave, he actually welcomed her into his courts. And he asked what she could give her, what she wanted, and that he would give her anything. So Esther did not say what she wanted, but instead she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. And at the banquet, Esther was still not clear of what she wanted, but she invited them to a second banquet the next day. When Haman left the first banquet at the night, he felt like he was of great importance because he had just walked out of a private dinner with the king and the queen. On his way home, he saw Mordecai sitting at the gates, and Mordecai was not afraid of him. And this made Haman really upset and really angry because it had ruined his night that he had with the king and the queen. So once Haman arrived at home, he plotted to kill Mordecai on a 75-foot pole that he was going to impale him on. Also that night, the king was having trouble sleeping, so he asked someone to bring him the book of history to be read to him. And during the reading, the king was told about the man named Mordecai who saved his life from his 2 eunuchs that were plotting to kill him. So at the same time that the king was trying to think of something to do to Haman so that he could be, or something to do to Mordecai to be placed of a high honor, Haman shows up, ready to tell the king of his plan to kill Mordecai. But before Haman was able to tell the king of Mordecai, the king asked him what would he do in a time to give someone great honor. And so Haman comes up with this big plan of how he would give honor to someone, how he thinks the king should give honor to someone. And whenever he was done with his story, the king told him to go do it to Mordecai because Mordecai had saved his life. So Haman, being sent out by the king, had to do it even though he was frustrated and didn't feel like he should do it. And he returned later that night, and he was just upset, and he did not want to do it because he was upset about having to do it because he had planned on killing him. So he gave up his plan of killing Mordecai because it wouldn't be of any use. And during the second night of the banquet, whenever Esther had planned the second banquet, the king once again asked her what he could do, what he should do in order to please her, what she was wanting. And she says in Esther 7:3-7, Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, give me my life and give my people their lives. We've been sold, and I and my people will be destroyed, sold to be massacred, eliminated. If we had just been sold off into slavery, I wouldn't have even brought it up. Our troubles wouldn't have been worthy bothering the king over." King Xerxes exploded. "Who? Where is he? This is monstrous. An enemy, an adversary, this evil Haman," says Esther. Haman was terror-stricken before the king and the queen. The king, raging, left his wine and stalked out into the palace garden. Later, the king returned with the 2 assistants to take him out of the room. And the king learned about the pole that Haman had planned to kill Mordecai on, and he ordered that Haman would be killed on it instead. The queen, Esther, decided that she was going to tell the king of her true life and how she was related to Mordecai and that she too was a Jew. Esther pleaded with the king not to kill her people, and he saw that her people would not be killed. So this was a long story of Esther, just to say that Esther had been in a time of great difficulty, but she got through it. And this applies to our lives, and that we oftentimes find ourselves stuck in these situations where we feel like we can't get out of it and where we feel like there's no way out. But God wants to provide a way out. And personally, I have a problem with stress. When I get really stressed out, I kind of just either let things go, I'll put things off and just not get them done, or I push through and then I get more stressed. But if I were in Esther's shoes, I would have been very